Welcome to the Emergent Human, where we explore optimizing health, embodied spirituality, and post-conventional living. I'm Michael Osterlink, a therapist, coach, and educator, and I'm your host. Today's show is brought to you by Cosper Scafidi, an amazing body worker in the Northern Virginia area who has integrated different somatic practices, including Rolfing, into his work. You can learn more about him at cosperscafidi.com. Today's guests are Curt Cronin and Jamie Wheal. From Navy SEAL Tier 1 operator to entrepreneur, Curt has a track record of making the impossible possible. He sees around the corner to unlock potential. He creates an energetic force field of coherence for teams to drop into flow and high performance. Curt received his MBA at combined programs from the London School of Economics, New York University's Stern School of Business, and the HEC School of Management in Paris. Curt graduated fifth in his class from the United States Naval Academy and has been awarded 2 Bronze Star Medals for combat valor and 3 Distinguished Meritorious Service Medals. He is married to his wife, Julia, and has 5 children. Jamie Wheal is the author of Recapture the Rapture, right here. God, Sex, and Death in a World That Has Lost Its Mind, and the Pulitzer Prize-nominated global bestseller, Stealing Fire, How Silicon Valley, Navy SEALs, and Maverick scientists are revolutionizing the way we live and work. He is the founder of the Flow Genome Project, an international organization dedicated to research and training in human performance. He lives in the high Rocky Mountains in an off-grid cabin with his partner, Julie, 2 children, Lucas and Emma, and their golden retrievers. When not riding, he can be found mountain biking, kite surfing, and backcountry skiing. Good to see you, gentlemen.
Nice to be here.
Epic to be here. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, it's been quite a few months since we chatted. So for our viewing audience, they should walk away from this conversation with a few things, including knowing what meaning 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 is, the connection between nitrous oxide and Churchill, Tibetan tantrikas. I love that story, by the way. 1, 2, 3 of God, the difference between alchemists and addicts, BDMS and first responders from 9/11, ISIS and Christian fundamentalism, the relationship between the two, breath practices and non-ordinary states of consciousness, the relationship between DevGru and hash-smoking assassin cult from Persia 1,000 years ago, clitoral orgasms, psilocybin and transcendent experiences, states to traits, and many other things. Wow, lots there, guys. So my question to start this conversation is, what questions are you seeking to answer with your work these days?
As if that wasn't a decent enough starter list. Yeah, you go.
I mean, the most important ones, how do we live a life of meaning, in the increasing uncertainty of today's era? That for me is the one that's the most exciting, intergenerationally, like, for me, for my children, and for my children's children, really is like, how do I create the principles, and lessons and learnings to, for me to evolve, but then to be able to take care of not just me, but expand that into, my direct line in our community.
Nice. Jamie, same question?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm thinking a lot about transition these days, sort of just personal, societal, economic, you name it. How do we do this thing? How do we navigate this bridge to a future that works for everybody? And sort of what, in the book, we talk about kind of like the coming alive arc versus the staying alive arc. Like coming alive is sort of infinite possibilities for myself and culture, society, and then staying alive is like, whoops, like diminishing choices, triage, what do we have to set aside in order to get hard things done quickly? And I think that dialectic between the coming alive of infinite fulfillment and possibility and the staying alive of, whoops, the hour is late, and choices we had on the chessboard 10 years ago, 50 years ago, may be no longer there, what's left. That's very much an open inquiry for me. And it's even in what we communicate in the world, like what's helpful now, because it feels like personal improvement and biohacking and state changing is so very 2015. and coming out of COVID and all these kinds of things, we're just like, whoa, there's not a back to normal. We're not back in normal, and we're probably not heading in that direction. What does this new wobbly future look like, and how do we help it stay on the tracks?
Before we kind of unpack what the wobbly future might look for us, and Curt, I love the idea of like, oh, my kids, like way down the road, what kind of world do we want to create for them? Let's take a moment to kind of look back at the past, because you talked about meaning 1.0 and 2.0, and now moving towards 3.0, which is hopefully what you guys can make real. But what is 1.0 and 2.0, and why are they failing us today that we need a 3.0?
Yeah, I mean, the simplest way, these are all just arbitrary handrails for us to kind of reference stuff. But in general, meaning 1.0, for most of human history, what was life, the universe, and everything? Who am I? What's my place in the cosmos, in society? How ought I act? Moral codes, all of those things were typically delivered by organized religions around the world. And they often offered salvation if you believe you're saved, at the cost of inclusion. But if you didn't believe, you were a non-believer, you were an apostate, a heretic, whatever, you didn't get the goods. So it was salvation at the cost of inclusion. And then, depending on how you date it, the English and then French Enlightenment, the kind of European Enlightenment of the sort of 17th century into the 18th century, that started being like, hey, let's, there's a lot of superstition, all the wars of religion, and, let's get past that. Let's get into rational imperialism, scientific materialism, but also civil society democracy. So that promised inclusion. All men and women are created equal, regardless of race, color, or creed, those kinds of promises. But, at the cost of salvation, God was dead, as Nietzsche said. So there became that sense of like, between those two, especially in the last century, but increasingly in the last decade, we've had a sort of a collapse in both faith, in organized religion, with the rise of the none of the aboves, the sort of, the spiritual but not religious, and those kind of communities. For the first time in human history, which is a kind of interesting milestone to note, first time in human history that more people don't affiliate or identify with one of the big pillar churches, synagogues, mosques, etc. of their background. They're just free agents. So that's never happened before. So, and then you've got church scandals, the collapse in their sort of unassailable, infallible rightness. And so we've seen that huge sagging of faith on the traditional side. And more than ever, especially since 2008, and I would say it probably doubled in the last 14 months, a deep suspicion and interrogation of late stage capitalism, of effectively kind of the globalist neoliberal experiment or promise. The whole trickle down economics didn't work, the whole deregulate everything and NAFTA and EU and all these things, or WHO and CDC, like, no, fuck it. People are saying that sucks, that's a bill of goods, K-shaped recovery, 1%ers, 0.001%ers are getting it all. We've all been robbed. Let's burn it down. Right? So the places we used to go to reorient, to make sense of things, to find meaning, purpose, and coherence, and even direction for our lives, those have kind of cracked and even are, sagging to the point of collapse. And so a meaning 3.0, which is, we don't have one yet, but, certainly that book is a provisional roadmap or thought experiment, is, can we take the best of both? And can we create inclusive salvation? Is there a way to do that for everyone on the planet and do it in a way that doesn't succumb to the pitfalls of either dogmatism and doctrine from the meaning 1.0 side, or God knows what, the list is long on the neoliberal critique, so I take your pick. But let's just say trashing the commons as a minimum on that side. Can we include everybody without breaking the bank of natural resources, food, space, air, water?
Right on. So let me ask you, Curt, and this is kind of more biographical for the both of you. And one of the things I heard you say, Jamie, is biohacking was so 215, state changes, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious for both of you, but let me start with you, Curt. When did you first begin to wake up to the limitations of 1 and 2 and the recognition that we need something new, which would be transcend and include, I would imagine, the best of meaning 1.0 and 2.0 to create something new? And it's not just about, flow state changes or state changes or psychedelics. It's not just about an individual changing his state. It's about we need something much more global than that.
Yeah, I would say it's a continuous, gradual process for me. Starting with the first time you go into combat, the world, becomes, you realize quickly, like, hey, this could, every single time the aircraft left the United States of America, my assumption was I was dead, right? Because I knew that if I had limited resources, I wanted to be able to be fully engaged in what was occurring in front of me, because my greatest fear is if I didn't act fast enough, someone else under my leadership would die. And so for me, it started with the progression of, I need to be fully present and fully inclusive. I mean, the most appropriate nickname I think that I've ever heard, for the SEALs is team guy. And that is the greatest superpower of the teams, is that it is never about the individual. It's about the collective. It's about functioning as one. And all SEALs are fundamentally flawed humans, just like the rest of us, but you can do extraordinary components because you have the strength of each person, then becomes the strength of the team, and it compensates for each other's weaknesses. And so for me, like, that's where that brotherhood of inclusivity, and like my favorite moment was always that moment in the desert when the rotors were spinning up, and you kind of get on board the helicopter, and of course there's wind everywhere, and you can't really hear anything, but you look across the helicopter and look right at them, but then you'd have to, of course, pick up and have your night vision 45 degrees off and you quick head nod. And that meant my life and yours and mine. For me, that sense of community was the component that was the most exciting and exhilarating component that allowed you to, like, every night when he took off, say, Curt, do you have any idea what you're going to do tonight? You're like, no, because the enemy always gets a vote. But are you certain you can take on anything? The answer is absolutely, because the team was completely aligned and each person was in full surrender to each other, that the collective was what we were going for, and it was never about the individual anymore. For me, that was the progression as I came out of the military and looked at the business world and looked at the civilian world, was like, okay, how do we bring that type of community and communitas to the greater community? Because that's what I continuously see, is people feeling the illusion of being alone, or that they're individuals and not part of that collective. And that's the most challenging part of the transition for military. And for me, it's the exciting component of how do you create that magical team again.
Nice. Thank you, Curt. How about you, Jamie? When did your awakenings begin and what were they about?
Well, I contest the term, Senator. Give me a different way in other than awakening, because that sounds a little pretentious for me.
Okay, no, that's fine. So one of the things I heard you say is it can't just be about the individual, a sovereign individual biohacking themselves. That's not going to save the world. That's not going to generate a new way for us to create cohesion and coherence and survive, really. And not only survive, but thrive. Was there a particular time or series of times you were like, okay, I need to think much bigger in scale? It can't just be about this group of people I'm working with or that individual I'm working with. This has to be a global effort, or much bigger than a smaller group of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my first kind of, big aha kind of breakthrough experiences were in college, and found, like, oh wow, this is what life could be, full strength, bright light, like possibility. And then I sort of was like, oh well, clearly we're not the first to stumble into this. What is this? What are these experiences like? Where do they come from? What are the stories? Like, who the hell has done this before? Who are our elders and teachers and that kind of stuff? And everything from that Paul Newman film Cool Hand Luke to Stranger in a Strange Land to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, to Kesey's life with the pranksters, so electric Kool-Aid acid test and all those. That was kind of the rabbit holes that I went down, and in every single one of those, that bright light avatar person gets nailed. Like, that's the story. It's the tragic hero again and again and again and again. And the more you look for it, you're like, this doesn't pencil out. You know, every single, I mean, it's Nietzsche again, right? He said that there, in truth, there was only one Christian, and they nailed him to a tree. You know, you're like, so, so that sense of, wow, we have this overwhelmingly prominent and dominant archetype, at least in the Western tradition, of the sole person booting up, but creating an immune response in the society they attempt to help or bring that input message to. I mean, it's Plato's allegory of the cave too, right? I mean, most people just kind of think of the shadow puppets and that kind of stuff, but like for me, the line that kills me every time is like, and what happens, Glaucon, you know, it's a dialogue, and he's like, what happens when the dude who's climbed out of the cave, broken his chains, stared at the sun, what happens when he comes back into the cave? Well, he's blind. And then what do the people do? They mock him. You know, so like, so that to me was a sort of Gordian knot. It was a cultural dead end. You're like, fuck, the tragic hero thing clearly doesn't work. Is there a path to the cosmic hero, right, that doesn't require that same sort of sad sacrifice every single time, utterly predictably? Doesn't require the annihilation of that individual. Is there some other way around this? And I would say that was, you know, a good couple of decades of inquiry and the notion of going from the second coming to an umpteenth coming, sharing the sort of the cheat codes to the experience of accelerated, heightened human development, and then making it utterly ordinary in a truly sort of crowdsourced way, an open source way. Like it's all of us or none of us, and none of us are special, but we're all exceptional. Kind of like what Curt was describing about the teams, right? All flawed people, but together we do something spectacular. I guess that's kind of, that was the, I guess that was my best shot or best hope for a way to start just shifting the group out of just repeating that old tragic narrative.
Are there any pop cultural references these days or historical that reflect what you're saying? A more cosmic approach? Because we are seemingly story-driven or narrative-driven beings, and we like our heroes, we like our stories, et cetera, et cetera. And it seems to me like if there are stories that you can refer people to, I know we're creating new ones this very moment, but you know, people like movies, they like TV shows, they like to read. Is there, besides your book, obviously, anything out there?
What do you think, man?
Well, I'm passionate about live stories. That's what I love about Broadway. And I find like Hadestown, right? And it's Greek mythology set in New Orleans, right? So like, you know, that ancient, you know, truths brought into a new environment with new song and carried forward, right? So that's the fun part about that long lineage of, you know, a whole new generation that may not know, you know, that mythology now gets connected to it through, you know, a modern telling of it. So for me, like that's what's fun, when you can see like the echoes, you know, and the lineage all the way through, but presented in a new way that now is resonant with the current audience.
I like that, because I'm reminded in your book, at least, Jamie, you talk about Star Wars, the whole series, and The Matrix. And it started out one way, and it's like by the end of both series, it's a completely different storytelling. Not as happy from like a binary perspective as they both started, because as you state in your book, you know, is it the red pill that awakens you? I can't remember, red or blue.
Yeah.
Red. That every group thinks they are taking the red pill, and that every other group, not them, is taking the blue pill. As opposed to in original ideas, like you're either awake or you're not. There's not this multiverse of options. So, you know, could you actually speak to that in terms of pop culture, like how you've seen, using Star Wars or The Matrix as examples, the changes in our culture, which is leading up to some of the challenges that we're facing in terms of disintegration or less effectiveness of some of our cultures and systems, which creates the openness for 3.0, or the openness, and as you state, for some of these rapturous groups, whether it's ISIS, the Christian fundamentalists, singularity people, or people heading to Mars, are creating stories that lead some to salvation and others to their doom.
Yeah, I mean, I think a helpful way to think of it is the notion of like we're probably not heading towards a singularity, like of any stripe, whether it's a techno-utopian one or it's a traditional religious one. Like the idea that we're all marching to a nice and tidy story, and that 99 of your stories are all wrong, but one of them is going to win, and it's going to play out exactly like one of our good books says it's going to. is probably less likely to happen, I think, than a sort of intertwingularity. The idea that like we're getting sucked down the drain pipe of time and space. So everybody's end times, end games are getting pulled together, swirled together, tangled and braided together. And we're seeing this very strange cross-wiring of mythopoetics. So in the case of The Matrix, right, first 20 years of that story, becoming this really, ubiquitous meme, take the red pill, etc. It was for anybody who was a free thinker or for a rebel, and it was a big tent. It was the big tent matrix, and then 2016, Reddit, 4chan, those kind of things, you kind of get the incel guys being like, oh, you've been red pilled, and it really means that you live in a man-hating, gynocentric, PC, thought policey world, and you're the hard-pressed, downtrodden ones, white guys. And that's getting red pilled. So they, and then Kanye's even tweeting about it, and all kinds of things. You're like, and people were like, wait a second, like now I can't say red pill and it means the same thing anymore, or Steve Bannon saying, darkness is good, evil's good, like, Satan's good, Darth Vader's good, and the Republicans, in fact, I think Northern Virginia are probably not far from you, right? They set up what they proudly called the Death Star of the Brad Pascal social media engine. And you're like, wait, Ronald Reagan launched the Star Wars Initiative. I remember writing a book report on that thing in the second grade, and he labeled the Soviets the evil empire. Like at that point, like US was the rebels and all the baddies were Darth Vader and the evil empire. And then by, 35 years later, we're into a complete inversion. And those are relatively lighthearted and inconsequential examples, the Star Wars and the Matrix, right? But then you start getting into deeper stories with more momentum behind them, like true apocalypse stories of Christian Zionists, ISIS, certain branches of Wahhabi Islam, those kind of things. And they're actually, they have potentially cataclysmic consequence. They're directly impacting geopolitics. And you get to the place of narrative confusion, and I think we're seeing it. We definitely saw it in the pandemic, where we can be looking at the same thing in the world, the same person or the same event, and we can both agree that that is a super duper important person or event. But then what we think they are, what role they're playing in our story, good guy, bad guy, those kind of things, is completely opposite. So is Bill Gates, right, a really good guy who's paved the way for philanthropism, and he's actually inspired a ton of billionaires to give away half their money, and he's saving the world with the Gates Foundation and the initiative? Well, he's a little tarnished lately, right? Like, so things have been getting a little shadier on the decades and billions of dollars of cultivated PR and all those kinds of things. So people are like, well, wait, is he saving and helping the world, or is he a secret supervillain trying to take it over? Is the deep state, right? Whose side are they on? Are they actually the true patriots who have been resisting a populist dismantling of democracy? Or are they the pedophilic satanic bad guys? And you could just look around and play that game all day long. I mean, the one that first prompted, I think this was like 2015, and I looked up Maitreya, like the Buddhist world teacher, because there was somebody in Northern California that had claimed to be the new one, and I was like, oh shit, this is fascinating. Like, what is this, right? Let me just do a little Googling. And the Googling came out was Barack Obama is the Maitreya, and then it was, but the Maitreya is a false teacher and is actually the Antichrist, and it's Barack, right? So you're like,
Okay.
and you're like, oh shit. So here you would have around the world, Buddhists being like, yay, the Maitreya is coming. And you'd have Christian fundamentalists going, the Maitreya is coming, and your good guy is our bad guy. And we're even going to tack that onto a current political figure, which we already have strong feelings about, et cetera. So you're just like, oh shit. So we are, the fancy term is epistemic collapse, that our stories are no longer holding. And as we seek, I think, to sort of fill in the cast of characters, almost like sort of buzzword bingo, we're sort of like lunging to cram characters into them. And you certainly see that in the QAnon phenomenon, right? Where there's sort of, it's apophenia, it's excessive pattern recognition. So they're seeing patterns where there aren't any, even to the point of like that Suez Canal tanker, and then they tracked the name of the tanker, and then the name of the holding company that owned the tanker was actually the same name that Hillary Clinton had used in a campaign for something, and then therefore inside the tanker must have been
Wow.
sex trafficked children and sex toys, like and you just you see that, and you're just like, wow, okay, now we're effectively descending into apocalyptic, well, scatesthesia, the sense of the end time, and apophenia, excess pattern recognition, descending into paranoia or sort of almost schizophrenia.
So, Curt, how do you personally, and you have 5 kids, a wife, lots of friends, how do you deal with, approach, face what Jamie's talking about, you call it epistemic collapse?
Yeah, for me, when I was a plebe with the Naval Academy, they called it, we're getting back to basics. Yeah, and for me, it's getting, what are the grounded principles that, like, if you watched COVID and all these, to me, like, I kinesthetic, so I experientially feel as you watch people collapse all of the rules and infrastructures into what is the grounded truth that remains, right? And so for me, it's, where do we start, right? We start with, we are a community, right? We are a family. We are, and it goes into what is your close-in tribe, right? So now it's like, and that's kind of what you're seeing, like people going, okay, what's the tribe where I can now have my highest sense of trust, and then how do I find those superconductors and expand that back into a community, expand that back. And so for me, it's shrinking into where can you get grounded, and then how do I now expand back out as rapidly as possible, because any time in your combat operation or outdoors, like any time that if you're just cross the river and stream and you're icy cold, the first thing you've got to do is self-help and get yourself back to the point where you can help others. And so it's not losing, oh wow, I need to reground, right? And that's the component where now I can now serve first my kids and my family, and that gives me the lessons where I expand into my broader community.
What are some of the principles that you fall back on to help guide you to deal with this, and then eventually expand beyond your family and community to the larger world around you?
Yeah, see, the most powerful one is love, right? Love and connection, right? The and fighting against that illusion on stressful situations, that great fear that I'm alone, I'm the only one experiencing this, and I can kind of feel my superpower or drain when I kind of get to that space, right? And that's kind of my indicator of like warning, like need to reset, reground, and like how do you get back to the basic rituals of I need to get some sleep, I then need to get oxygen, I need to get out in the outdoors, right? And resetting, so that I can just like rebooting your computer. How do I now reset and then start again and re-engage? And like I love, Jamie and I play with like what's the 80-20, right? Like hey, I'm gonna spend that time recovering so that I can get back in a peak state and back to contributing again. And for me, I always find out who are the people I can go to recharge, right? And it's like the 1.21 gigawatts, right? When I can plug in and say, hey, I need help now. When I can plug in, and I get re-energized. And having that community is, whether it's in the SEALs or in the civilian world, is the critical component of resetting and going, okay, yes, all this too shall pass, and what am I going to do next?
You talk in terms of resetting. Part of the reset is the reset of the nervous system, the brain-mind system. You guys talk about hedonic engineering, inspiration, healing, and connection. And I like to take this conversation kind of in those directions. And as critical as you were, Jamie, of the 2015, can't just all biohack our way out of it. You guys do spend a good amount of time helping people in the inspirational, healing, and connection space through different techniques and technologies. Some of them ancient. You talk about, was it neuroanthropology, and some of the more modern sciences kind of coming together and giving us really cool tools, techniques, technologies, and ways of changing states. Can we talk a little bit about those kind of things and how important it is for 3.0?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simplest is life's a bitch and then we die. Right? And the in between is a task to figure out. And so we can absolutely have really reliable access to amazing peak states of inspiration, clarity, heightened information, pattern recognition, processing, all the things of awe, ineffability, spiritual experience, religious experience, whatever we would peak experience. Take your pick of the declensions, right? And quite often those have been peddled. They've been commoditized or weaponized as ways to escape or bypass the human condition. And I think that almost always creates more suffering and problems, if not for oneself, at the minimum for cascades, of externalities to others. But if you put those in the context of the life's a bitch and then we die, so how do we do this thing without getting pile drived into the ground, right? Standing tall, like stretching our bones, laying our burdens down for a moment with a peak experience is both, emotionally and psychologically rejuvenating and affirming, because the day-to-day can just, it can grind us out. And then we're like, yes, I remember, here's this beautiful sunset, here's a moment with my child, here's an uplifting song, here's a breakthrough, non-ordinary state experience, whatever it would be. And that often reminds us of what we might have forgotten. And that could be our deepest purpose, that could be some mission, that could be some insight, it could be an entrepreneurial breakthrough, it could be a relational insight, whatever it would be, like things that I normally don't have access to in the day-to-day. As I level up, I can sort of gain access to read and write those files. And so there's a huge amount of information and inspiration that comes. And at the same time, there's often kind of a printout of the places we're banged up, broken, the places we're out of integrity, the amends and amends we need to make in our relating, and we've got more gas in the tank now. So we're like, oh, okay, so I'm going to come back from down the mountain with a little bit more of a spring in my step and homework to do, and it no longer seems so impossible or overwhelming. And if we can, and that's the catharsis. So ecstasis is the Greek term for the high ground. Catharsis would be the deep healing and the integration. And we typically don't do it in a closet. We do it with others, right? And so both the peak bonding, and Curt, I know you experienced this in not what would not normally be considered peak states, but in combat, right, with team, and that kind of connectivity. It's a sort of three-legged stool of ecstasis, catharsis, and communitas. And sort of that's how we do this human thing. And if any one of them gets out of whack, right, if I'm just focusing on my personal growth and peak experiences and healing, but I'm not in connection with anybody, I'm almost certainly going to veer off into either inflationary ideas, magical thinking, or just sucking my thumb, and self-soothing, whatever it would be. And if I'm just with people doing healing, or dealing it, reveling in the pain, but we have no higher inspiration, that gets out of balance. But if we have a nice equilateral triangle of those things, it becomes the flywheel that propels us forward through our lives, through history, and gives us a chance to sort of mend as we go, remember what we forgot, and forge connections with each other as the tribal primates we are. And it's also a really good course corrector, because I might get high on my own supply. I might think my shit doesn't stink, and then all you need to do is come home and try a family dinner, and you'll be like, oh, whoops, not quite done yet. I dropped a stitch, damn it. And so that just feels to me like it's a beautifully balanced and grounded approach, which is we don't get a happily ever after ticket out of this mess. The phrase we often use is, or we play with, it never ceases to lighten the load, is that Zorba the Greek phrase of like, it's the full catastrophe, man. Like this life, the wife, the kids, the fishing boat, the full catastrophe. And like just that embrace of like the WYSIWYG, this is it. This is the human experience. We don't get to sit full lotus and levitate. We don't get to manifest everything on our dream board. Like it is what it is. And that there's a profound beauty and empowerment to actually just accepting that, unvarnished, unadorned. Like the mystery of life doesn't require bells and whistles. It doesn't require being wrapped in cotton candy or emojis. Like it's gutting. It's absolutely gutting, and it's profound. And let's get cracking.
My favorite example, Michael, example would be like last year in October, we dropped down into the canyons of Utah, and it was at the height of the elections coming. And so, social media, like, every feed everywhere. And it was one of those components where, and everyone's basically been in isolation. And that was part of it, everyone's isolation. Then you flew there, took a COVID test, and then as we dropped in the canyon, take the masks off, and it took about 90 seconds for 99 months of COVID just unwind, and you could see people go, now we're going deep into the canyon. Now we're in millions of years in rock and thousands of years of human history. And there was one night where we got to camp late, and we were just like, wow, humans have been doing this human thing for thousands of years. And all of a sudden, the events of the day don't have the same magnitude they did when compared to that. And so all of a sudden, like, first thing in the morning, you wake up and the sun's hitting the petroglyph, and you're like, wow. And so
like we didn't even know there were petroglyphs in this little cave, but it seemed like the groovy spot to camp, right?
Nice.
And we had said that the night before, only to find the petroglyphs in the morning. Like, oh, really?
That was the fun part. Then as you come back out, you came back out fully recharged, grounded, and now ready to help others that didn't get to have that experience. And so that, that to me is, one of those, when you talk about tactical, operational, strategic, that's what, hey, once a quarter, what's the type of event where it's a full 48 to 72 hour recharge? And then, of course, you have the events you do during the day, you have all kinds of different ones, but that one to me is a fun one where you can really go, wow, and the most humbling thing you'd think, it was the amazing teachings and lessons and spending our life working it. And everyone, to include myself, came out and said, wow, not being attached to my phone for 10 days, I realized, like, this is how I'm supposed to wake up. This is how I'm when I'm not fragmented. So some of the most basic components of the reset are the most profound.
Actually, can you speak more about the camps that you guys run? That'd be great for people to know that there are opportunities if they want to take advantage of these kind of experiences, that they can work with you guys in this space.
Yeah, hit it. You were riffing.
Sure, I mean, you just got to, kind of like what that 7-day experience of the canyon is. And really, we kind of walk it through similar to spiral dynamics. The first day you get to make fire, and then it's how you build communities, and then you continue to increase in complexity, and then kind of build it to where that culmination of day 4, and then now you're reintegrating it. So the fun thing about the canyon is you go back into the world. And so that's one example we have up in the summer, following the hydrologic cycle. The snow falls in the mountains, comes down, and then the summer gathering, there'll be Flow Camp in the summertime, where now you can have larger numbers of people. The canyon is obviously restricted to like 15, where you can have 50 plus that will gather in the summer together for the summer celebration.
Nice. Is there a website people can check out to learn more about these experiences?
Yeah, just flowgenomeproject.com. And
nice.
then there's a tab for trainings and next events. And so, yeah, as Curt was describing it, like, summer is our kind of biggest gatherings, because that's kind of the obvious time for sort of festival and celebration. And then winter courses with the snowfall, right? Then into the canyons as the snow melts, right? And then into the ocean down in Baja, and doing kite surfing, stand-up paddling, free diving, all those kind of things. So we just kind of move through the ecosystem and where the snow, rain, weather, water would go through that year, and just kind of keep the seasons, and then provide that for people who want to plug in for all of it. And those are their kind of quarterly booster shots, or want to just parachute in for a specific one they're most excited about.
That's awesome. Now, Jamie, you talked about the triangle: catharsis, ecstasis, and then communitas. Can we break those three down? Because at the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned that people should be walking away with, hey, they should have a basic understanding, grasp, or at least a tease around. Here's about a dozen weird things that I mentioned. So here's an opportunity to kind of plug those things into the triangle, including nitrous oxide and Churchill, 1, 2, 3 of God, and psilocybin, female clitoral orgasms, and transcendence, all that kind of good stuff. So let's start with catharsis. Why is that important as a for the globe, for people to be able to have experiences of catharsis for healing? And what are some of the things that can induce those experiences?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I think, back to the life's a bitch, right? I mean, I think just a lot of us take hits along the way. And when we take hits that we can't metabolize or mend in real time, they show up in our bodies, brains, minds and hearts as trauma. And typically The old joke of hurt people
Yeah.
is often true. We're least resourceful, least caring and compassionate, most reactive in traumatized states. And there's been tremendous additional energy and light shed on that in the last 4 or 5 years, right? I mean, trauma used to be a very, very niche kind of concept. Tim Ferriss interviewed our friend and colleague Gabor Mate, and it's millions of views. Gabor's book In the Realm of the Hungry Ghost, and the new one he's working on, dive deeply into this. The psychedelic renaissance and the MDMA and PTSD work that MAPS has been doing. This is, Bessel van der Kolk and The Body Keeps the Score. There's been this tremendous surge in interest in, like, oh my gosh, we're all kind of banged up, and how do we heal better? And there's also been, over-indexing on it and the total fetishization of trauma and triggers and I don't feel safe and microaggressions and a whole lot of things which I think actually diminish the profoundly important and very real traumas that are being experienced around the world, outside college campuses, outside progressive cities and towns, refugees and displacements and civil wars and like real stuff. So it's sort of both we're overindulging in it and sort of using it as an escape right now, and it's also surfacing something that definitely is important and needs to be dealt with. So, it feels like there's a great phrase from this fellow Martin Prechtel, who's a Mayan elder and poet, but he talks about the notion of undigested grief, like we're choking on our undigested grief. And I think you could see that in a lot of the culture wars of the last couple of years, right? There's tons of undigested grief. And it's not, Charlottesville, there's good people on both sides, but, to actually have compassion for people who are now in divergent camps is to say, well, there's undigested grief in Rust Belt, right, not just kind of hillbilly elegy, but yes, that too, right? But the collapse of old lifeways and industrial and extractive industries, all of those kinds of things. And at the same time, tons of undigested grief and the legacy of genocide and slavery and the broken promises of a post-racial society. Like you're like, wait, what's happening here? So, it's critical for us to, in order to be able to feel the real moment and be present to it, to digest that backlog, because it ends up as numbing or body armoring or whatever, take your sort of your model, but it's definitely not helpful. And so if we can learn to digest our grief, if we can learn to metabolize it, and there's often a relationship between a peak experience and a discharge of trauma on a neurophysiological level as well as on a emotional psychological level, we get closer back to what a colleague of ours, Ryan Darcy, who's a neuroscientist in Vancouver, calls a global system reset, specifically by a stimulation of kind of the cranial nerves brainstem reboot, and sort of, effectively an ecstatic discharge, zero out, level set, boot back up. He used the analogy of like when your computer's been open, laptop's been open for a week and you haven't turned it off and it starts glitching. Power off that button, bloop, and start it back up, and things tend to work a whole lot better, right? And that's true for us as well. And we now know the protocols of how to create that, how to stimulate that global systemic reboot. And while that's clinical, it's all Western science and medical terminology and very specific measurements and imaging and that kind of stuff, it also correlates to most death rebirth practices in most traditions throughout all of human history, that they're not content neutral. It's not like you're just like whacked upside the head with a jumper cable and you wake up 45 minutes later and you get dressed and go back to your commute, right? They're typically some of the most profound and inspiring interior experiences that we ever have. Highly generative, both creativity, innovation, problem solving, all these kinds, not as a Silicon Valley, lunchtime hack, not that kind of a thing, but like where the Onion was like, shamans, ayahuasca shamans, like, I'm coming down here to come up with my new app idea, like that kind of a thing. Not that, but a sense that, fascinatingly, some of the most rich information we appear to have access to comes from a correlate, a very specific spot of like low delta wave EEG activity. And so it's the closest you can get to brain dead, like literally like 0.1 hertz to 4 hertz. So you're barely having any brain activity at all. But what it feels like on the inside is inception. It feels like lucid dreaming. And then coming out of that experience often leaves us in a space of reset, homeostasis. Like at least now I'm back to 0, on my Cartesian grid. I'm not out in left field, and like trying to compensate. And that's what it offers, right? Nothing more nor less, just a place, a chance to come back to center and begin again.
I do want you guys to talk a little bit more about the reboot, some of the technologies. You mentioned MDMA, ketamine, nitrous oxide, their breathing practices. There's an interesting tongue system, the electrical impulse through the tongue. But before we get there, Curt, I have a question for you. Jamie mentioned body, well, you mentioned armor, and I'm thinking like Reich in terms of body armor. And I have a friend who has a program called Armor Down. He helps combat veterans who armored up for combat, teach them how to armor down into civilian life. And, as a combat veteran yourself, I'm just curious in terms of institutions, is there any effort, either presently or thinking through in the future, where they're helping veterans de-armor themselves? And I don't mean physically removing their body armor, but like the armor, because you have to be armored up for combat, I would imagine, but you don't want to be armored up and you go back to civilian life and you're with your kids and your spouse and your family and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Are there programs that help veterans do that?
And the answer is yes, everyone's trying, and it's hard. One of my mentors, Tom Crum, was instrumental to me. I said, I'd love for you to come and speak to the command, because, I think a lot of people have post-traumatic stress disorder. And, Tom was like, fantastic, I believe in post-traumatic growth disorder, right? And so it's helping but the only way to get from one side of the chasm to the other is to, go through that cathartic process of healing so that you can get to a base where you can start to build again. I think a lot of times there's a perception of, I need to keep on my armor. I need to have, the perception that everything's fine, and it's not fine. And the first key is going back to kind of what I touched on earlier, is like finding the safe place where you can feel, secure. And it comes from many different sources, right? Whether it's from, your band of brothers, whether it's, for me, some of the hardest times, I remember Olivia Grace was, 2 years old at the time. And I remember just coming home and like, just big bear hugs, for her was one of the components for me. I'm like, okay, like this little being is good, true, and beautiful. Therefore, I can go out, have confidence, and we can create more of that. And so that, that is each person is different. So when you say any individual program, sometimes it's hard because it's what's the unlock for each person. That was the most interesting thing in leadership for me, was figuring out likes. I used to show up always in one way, and then if it didn't resonate for someone, I'd realize, oh, it's because I need to show up in the way that they can see, hear, and understand me. And so each program comes down to, where's that individual, where can they feel seen, heard, and understood, where can they feel like they can be safe to be vulnerable so that they can get grounded and heal again. So I think many are trying. The key is, the teacher doesn't appear till the student is ready. And I think one of the hardest lessons is shifting from, I have to be okay and I have to always say I'm okay, which is kind of the perception of the military, into, hey, I mean, that was the biggest transition we had to make in the SEALs, was like, I need you to raise your hand and say you're not okay, because it's okay if you're not okay. It's not okay if you say you've got it and you don't, because we're not going to look there, because we're assuming you have that. And so that's that team concept, and you realize, if I really care about my team, then I'm going to say when I need help, and then that's part of where the healing process can begin.
Thank you, Curt. So can you guys walk us through some of the cathartic technologies as well as the stasis technologies that are out there, including, sacred medicines is great. You can talk a little bit about that, but there's also some really interesting sex, breath practices, other such things, the tongue technology.
Yeah, I mean, they often go together, right? So that techniques that precipitate or prompt a peak or a spike often kind of have that beautiful discharge reorganization at the bottom or at the back end, a kind of a refractory period. And there's all sorts of high-tech fancy pants ways to do this. Like never, if you're not dependent on co-pays and you can pay cash on the barrelhead, and you can get your appointment with a functional medicine doc to the stars. But for the rest of us, and that's and that was certainly one of the design criteria for a meaning 3.0, which is if we're trying to do something that's truly global and inclusive, it needs to be available to the bottom 4 billion people, or it's not going to get us that far. And so once you've accepted that, like it's got to be, that fundamentally it's got to be open source, so it's not proprietary and people anywhere can tinker with it, add to it, modify it. And it's got to be scalable, which means basically cheap or free. That guides you back to bodily functions, because we've all got them, right? And the strongest, the strongest like judo move or lever to move things or to pivot things on are typically things that are highly encoded or encouraged evolutionarily. So if we don't do them, we die, kind of thing. And two easy ones for that is if we don't breathe, we die, and if we don't procreate, we die. And so just right there, and if we lose control or awareness of our whole metabolic kinesthetic support system, we die, right? So you could just start with those three of just respiration, embodiment, and sexuality, and realize that by changing the rate, rhythm, and depth of how we breathe, all the way up to potentially even doing gas-assisted breath work. So you're actually more like scuba divers, and you're starting to swap out nitrogen for nitrous oxide or a nitroxygen blend. You might massively increase carbon dioxide and create something called carbogen, which is 70% oxygen, 30% CO2, but it produces wildly different effects. You can completely change consciousness even without the gas assisted. That's kind of like fancy waistcoats, but it's rad. Even just hyperventilating, vagal breathing, super slow breathing, you can upregulate, downregulate, and cross-regulate your nervous system into consciousness. So those are all super interesting. And then in the embodied state, one of the interesting ones, and this came from, I think you mentioned it, that there was just a wild story. You wouldn't have found this in Wikipedia for a month of Sundays, but there was an underground sex club dungeon scene down by 9/11 in downtown New York in 2001, 2002. And it started becoming frequented by a lot of firefighters, police, first responders who had survived the Twin Towers. And that they were actually working with dominatrices to have what they called concerted beatings, which wasn't kinky sexy at all. It was, I actually need this amount of like nervous system stimulation in order to come back into my body after feeling trauma and survivor's guilt, so that, and this was in their own words, so that they had earned the right to be alive, where so many had so randomly lost theirs. And there's a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania who I mean, I didn't know this, but he's like, humans are totally unique in our ability to actually enjoy unpleasant things, like spicy foods and horror movies and roller coasters, and and pleasure pain. And you can't get an animal to do that shit more than once. You can bribe them, you can make it correlate to food supply or something else, but they will not do it. And we're unique in this potential cross-wiring of pain and pleasure. And then you can take that all the way to, how, because look, every life, life's a bitch and then we die. So you're like, okay, we know we're going to be experiencing trauma. The question is, what do we do with it? And there's this rich tradition, like those first responders had just intuited their way into what is, as soon as you look at it, and this is kind of a functioning definition of neuroanthropology, is like, look around for anything that interests you that we're doing. And it seems like there's a that there's a buzz around it, or there's a community of practice around it, or that or it's growing in it, in its scale of interest. And just like, okay, now look for as many similar things in the historical record. Where has anybody else ever done this across time and space? And that's the anthro part. And then the neuro part is, so what do they have in common, and what are the mechanisms of action under the hood that actually, never mind the stories that were told about it, like what is it, what actually makes it work? And that almost always yields these fascinating backstories. So then you look at the penitentes in northern New Mexico, and like they've been reenacting the Passion of the Christ. It still goes on in this rural place outside of Santa Fe, and they get flogged with brine soaked whips. They wear crowns of thorns. They carry heavy crosses. Some even get tied up and crucified on Good Friday. And there's this agony, ecstasy element. The same with the Lakota Sundance, the same with, with the Spartans and the Feast of Diana. Like, it's always been this way. And you're like, okay, so that is a beautiful way to deliberately and counterintuitively discharge pain by actually explicitly cultivating more of it. And you're like, okay, that's really kind of neat. Because like most times when somebody is either self-identifies as traumatized or is part of a community or population when people are trying to help, they try and like, it's sometimes kid gloves, like let's wrap them in cotton wool and don't, trigger warning here, trigger warning there, like let's avoid any more traumatizing. And that's beautiful. It's nice work if you can get it, kind of thing, right? But there might also be like that sense of like, oh, actually there are more powerful ways. And the probably the most I don't know, I wouldn't say the most, but a sophisticated, sort of sublimated example of this is Tibetan Tonglen meditation, which then says, I'm not going to sit on a cushion trying to get to my happy place or to emptiness, right? Or to any of those, groovy, good feelings. I'm actually going to visualize my own suffering, inhale it, breathe it out, like actually metabolize it, and then breathe it out as light or love. And if I can do that for my own heartache, can I do it for everyone I know? Can I do it for everyone in my community or the world? All the way out to all sentient beings everywhere, everywhere. And you're like, oh shit, now just that little practice. Instead of me trying to shield myself from a dirty world, I now go hoovering up all the suffering in the world, right? Knowing that is my lead into gold, right? That's my, or the Rumpelstiltskin, right? Like I can spin it into something beautiful. And that fundamentally inverts our relationship to our own pain and suffering, as well as to everyone else's. We cease to try and like bypass it, fix it, cure it, get past it, avoid it. And we're actually like, whoa, I can welcome it. I can actually metabolize it instead. And so that, the 9/11 first responders were doing a very physical version of what actually goes all the way up the stack into a profoundly sort of metaphorical alchemical practice, if we choose to kind of cultivate that capacity.
What I like to do is take this conversation from individuals and small groups of people doing these practices and looking at institutions and systems. Because I would imagine, like, if we are going to create 3.0 in a positive direction, the institutions and systems need to reflect new ways of thinking, integrating 1.0 and 2.0 into how they operate. Now, Curt, as a tier 1 operator, you had different ways of operating within Big Navy, which is a part of DoD, but you still have to operate within institutional morass, bureaucracy, Big Navy, DoD. And I know, actually, I think knowing you, Jamie, for 15, 16 years, and conscious capitalism, the whole business world, also large institutions, slow to change. That's why a lot of them die, So I'm curious on your guys' take, like, how do you imagine working with and changing institutions and systems to positively reflect what we have now been talking about for the past hour, so we can go to 3.0 and thrive as a global community, not just survive as a small tribe and F everyone else?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I'd add to that would be, like, if you said, for someone who said, I'm in, I want to help become a part of the change, what do I need to do? And my answer would be, just get started, right? So like, it's fascinating when you can feel when something shifts to, oh, but what do we do at the institutional level? Is it fundamentally different? And at the largest institution, the difference between like traditional kind of conventional units and then when you get to tier 1 units was, before, if somebody said no, we'd say, oh, they said no. And as I progressed in my career, it was, if someone said no, then it was, okay, what's their address and how do we get to them, right? And so it just, fundamentally deciding I'm committed to the point where I'm going to go find the individual that is the representation of the institution, and I'm going to influence there. So to me, it becomes, it's the same principles I would use inside of my family, but now it's applying them on a much broader scale. And instead of that learned helplessness of I can't change the world or I can't change the institution, it's yes, and there's one person that's come up that's inside of the institution that I need to get to, that I'm going to be the one that gets there. So like, to me, that's where it just gets started. And I love the compound effect of small incremental change over time. And so, you may not notice it today, tomorrow, but over time, you get that exponential increase. And that's where, like, if we all do a little bit, that's the part that I think is the fundamental game changer.
Thank you, Curt. Jamie, how about you? Especially having spent a lot of time consulting, and actually, Curt, you too, in the business space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I haven't come across anybody who's cracked that better than Curt, honestly. I mean, like, hearing his stories of corralling three-letter agencies in war-torn regions and showing up in ridiculously humble service, like literally taking out the trash to be part of the help, to having somebody order, like the guy who was the log jam loving Chick-fil-A and getting a guy in Virginia to come on a military transport with a bag full of Chick-fil-A chicken sandwiches to like get to that guy, to then like human, deeply, profoundly, humbly human. And when Curt 20 minutes ago said I think love is kind of one of the simplest things to come back to, I'm blown away that he got anywhere in any of those situations, which were hopelessly political, with all sorts of turf wars and all the worst things you could imagine about bureaucratic, power-hungry humans, and somehow made magic happen, as you said, like at the human level. I don't have anywhere near that skill set or that optimism, because I would say fuck the lot. And Bucky Fuller kind of 101, like, don't try and change the system, build a different, better one. And so, my hat tip with all humility to Curt's playbook on working within systems for powerful coordination that not even like, it didn't exist prior. Like he was stitching things together that had not been, and did that with the power of like humility, love, and service. So yeah, I would say, and in cases where that's not possible, or you don't have that particular set of superpowers, then the criticize by creating, go build the better thing and let that be a strange attractor that other people orient around because it works better.
I love that yes and, because that's the most fun, is how do I optimize what currently exists? And then we continuously did that. Like it was okay when we ran into situations we'd never seen in the military before, we said, okay, we're going to stand up a joint task force, which is one of the best from each, and we're going to try this. And if it works, it's going to become a new thing. And if it doesn't work, we'll take it apart and build something new. So I love the yes and of optimize what's there. And if that's not sufficient for the challenge, then what would new look like? Because it is fun to create something new and then from momentum pull the organization towards it instead of trying to lift and shift the entire organization. It's a great yes and.
Love that. All right, so people are watching this, listening to this, and like, okay, I'm in. Let's build 3.0. What are their next steps? What would you recommend the viewing and listening audience do to support this global effort to create 3.0?
Yeah, well, I mean, we have playfully, like in the book, is instead of the 10 commandments, the 10 suggestions, like, because no one's going to listen to anybody anymore. So like, here's just some ideas. And one of them is, in fact, several. One is do the obvious, right? Like just do the obvious, like all the self-help, personal improvement stuff. We all know it and we've all known it, like sleep more, move often, eat real food, get outside, make love, be grateful, grieve fully, like simple shit, like human stuff. Do that. Boom. Now you've got tons of time and money back. Next one, don't do stupid shit. So don't end up in a cult, a body bag, a loony bin, right? A bankruptcy court, divorce court, right? Jail cell. Like, don't do those things, because then you bugger it up for everyone else who's playing with more powerful techniques of transformation. And then like, let the mystery stay the mystery. Like, it's so tempting when people have peak experiences to come back hair on fire with absolute false certainty as to what they've seen and what it means, and almost always what their special role is in it all. So like if we just said the mystery is deep and vast, right? And then we could just kind of let the burning bush burn, then we all get all that time back too. Right. And then that, and 80-20 work to broke, that I said, that sense of like, hey, we're never going to be perfect. That's a horizon line you can always sail towards and never arrive at. And we get 80% of our initial of the goods of what's true and useful out of the first 20% of our peak experiences and seeking. So like take that. It's like never go past your second shot of heroin. It's all downhill from there, friends. But that second one is amazing, right? So like know when to say when on your state seeking, right? And the pursuit of your perfectibility, and just those handful just suddenly get you back to like what Curt described about team guys, right? Like I don't need like I come off deployment, I want to fix where I was shot or what got ripped or torn, and then the moment I'm back to 80% threshold, I want to go back because I have a mission. Right, not I decide I'm going to get into cupping and get my yoga and massage certifications, and start becoming a sound bath facilitator. You're like, no, I have a mission, and that's what calls me back to the world, right? And so, I think the, meaning 3.0, like inclusive salvation, right? If we're using that as our yardstick, I would say it's the same advice that Curt offered, which is just start by starting, like break bread. Do like, then we have a book club, like literally like here's just a book club in a box. Like if you want to read this book, like here's a fun way to do 7 weekends, with friends. But even if you don't read the book, like 4 of the examples are drugs over dinner, death over dinner, sex over dinner, God over dinner, which is modeled on a TED chef who's a friend of ours, and he has this, it's a worldwide movement, death over dinner and drugs over dinner. We just added the other 2, but it's like a question at the appetizers, a question during the main course, and a question at dessert, and then just Jeffersonian style, one person talking, everyone listening. So like 6 to 8 people, and you can have these beautiful gatherings, pondering the richest questions, of our lives and experience. Like just start. And I think that even as we get overwhelmed by the global meta crisis, right? And I don't know where to start, and everything has to be super scalable or it's not worth doing, and so I collapse again into overwhelm and grief. Like it's actually, no, I think actually, paradoxically, the best thing we can do right now is regress into healthy tribalism. And the only healthy tribalism I'm aware of, I'm open to any other suggestions, but that there's not, race-based, ideologically based, religion or faith-based, or the old tribalisms, and even the current ones, is just bioregional tribalism, right? Like we live here, we give here. This is our watershed. This is where our food comes from. This is where our kids go to school. These are our neighbors. And for anybody that's experienced fires, floods, power outages, extreme winter storms, we've all been experiencing these things in more or less intensity lately. And the ability to become more resilient, become less fragile, become more trusting of the people we live next to. That, it's an inversion of that old kind of, Subaru Prius bumper sticker of like the think globally, act locally. You could almost be like, grieve globally, thrive locally. Right? Like open your heart to the wound of the world. There's a lot going on right now that we should feel and be paying attention to and bearing witness to. And right, we can't just be crushed by that. The best thing we could possibly do, even in this realm, in this world of completely extended, hyper-efficient global supply chains and the optimization of everything that's non-local, is to actually fucking put our roots down and re-knit community fabrics in ways that support our actual lives, and our actual families and communities.
I love that. So, great suggestions, guys. And if people are listening and viewing this and they're like, oh, I actually want to work with Jamie and I want to work with Curt, how do they find out more about what you guys offer? Where do they find your book, Jamie, in this case, et cetera, et cetera?
Probably just our email, Curt or Jamie at flowgenomeproject.com.
Fantastic.
He just did that. So there you go. They're out in
There
the
you
world.
go.
Yeah, and I mean, the book's easy and available at recapturetherapture.com. You can get it on Amazon, do whatever, but there's a whole open source set of tools
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
are just there for folks to, oh, look at that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like a field guide on all the models, a lot of the concepts, that book club and unbox, like things that we just wanted and hoped that people could make good use of. And then, we do a series of almost like martial arts, yellow belt, blue belt, brown belt, black belt kind of trainings that lead all the way up to those adventure courses and summer camps, but also start with digital trainings. There's a digital course, like a 6-week course that's a complement to the book, and it helps, choose your own apocalypse. Like, what do I think is going on for me, and what steps should I take? Alchemist cookbook, what are the tools and techniques of healing, inspiration, and connection? And then ethical cult building, like how do any of us participate in or lead communities of practice that don't fall into the ditches, the well-worn greasy ditches that so many have. So hopefully that, the intention is for this to be an open source operating system, and that people can get their hands on it, start playing with it, creating what's novel, helpful, true for them, and then share the successes, and help them propagate.
That's fantastic. Well, Curt, Jamie, appreciate your time. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I definitely encourage folks to check out the book, Recapture the Rapture. Check out Flow Genome Project and go train with these guys. Take care, fellas.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.